Welcome back. I hope that you got to meet some new faces. One of the things we didn't really mention before was who's in the room. Some of those, like I said, you might know, some you might not, but recognizing that there are Mayo Clinic physicians that are here, students, Mayo Clinic entrepreneurs, as well as business development, lots of different people from Mayo, but also external. So we have VCs in the room, we have community connectors that are in the room, and it's a very unique and diverse group. So we're really excited to be hosting everyone at one event here internal to Mayo. So I would like to welcome Dr. Stephen Ecker, who is the director of the Office of Entrepreneurship, to the stage. He will be welcoming in our keynote to kick off the afternoon.
Thank you, Raina. So one of the questions I get is, what is the Office of Entrepreneurship? And I would argue that this event highlights what the OE is. It's about the most important capital, which is you, us. It's the people in the space that are looking to make the world a better place, looking at optimistic ways to approach and to build a world that's going to be better for all of us. And that's what the Office of Entrepreneurship is designed to support. We do this, if I can have the slides, please, by empowering a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship through education. We focus on the most important capital, the human capital in our ecosystem, and we try to develop and grow components for that. So we work with inside, and then we do and partner events like this for external discussions and building out this wonderful community that is entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So we are also in the research space at Mayo because of this concept. So most people think of translational science as bench to bedside. And I'm not saying that's not true, but I don't have to convince this audience that in reality, this is what we call the 2B model. Next slide. In reality, when you want to build a human product, it's almost always bench to business to bedside, or the 3B model. And we are all about advocating for this 3B model, understanding this concept, understanding the components to it, and empowering the teams that can make this happen. Because almost always this is done in a team-based space, which is what the Clinical and Translational Science Center at Mayo advocates for, as well as the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, NCATS, and others, this team-based science approach to try to address unmet needs of our patients. Next slide. We actually have a formal entrepreneurial education set of courses. These are offered essentially our version of an I-Corps program, but it's really focused on life sciences. So lean startup for life science methodologies. We also partner, for example, we partnered with Pat Dillon. One of our classes is the goal where you actually have the ability to put an SBIR, STTR grant in play. So you start from pre-ideas through processes, through testing out, building the business model, de-risking the business idea, so you can go back and do the invention de-risking. So that's our core concepts, our core education. We have other components, but that's at our core. Next slide, please. Actually, go back to last slide. I apologize. I do want to say that we have one special course that has been wonderfully developed in partnership with Dr. Pam York in the Kappa 3 group in our own community. I'm not sure I've seen Pam yet, but this is a program called Leadership Launch, which is around educating our teams to be able to go through barriers and resolve critical components and be empowered to be able to take these ideas and make them a reality. And it's a wonderful component, and it's one of our courses offered for our students. Next slide, please. This is a part of our Clinical Innovation and Entrepreneurship Program. This is our CIE brand and badge, and we are excited to do this. We also partner with other organizations if they're interested in this space. Next slide. So our job is to take not only those courses, but we also do workshops. We try to meet the learners where they are. So where you are, so you could be a physician at Mayo, or you could be a nurse, or you could be a research scientist like I am running a basic science lab. We want to be able to match your availability with your needs. And so we do have that set of courses. That's sort of our core, but we have a series of other components with other formats We have extensive, for example, extensive partnerships with nursing in Arizona, if you're interested in. Those are concepts that we've been building out the last few years. Next slide. So you reach us, we have the world's easiest Mayo Clinic email. It's oe@mayo.edu. It's only 2 characters. It's as easy as it gets. We have a LinkedIn showcase that's here. If you want to reach us, that's also a great way to reach out. The OE has many staff. You'll meet most of them this afternoon as a part of the Walleye Tank event. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear more. We'd love to hear. We are essentially a startup ourselves. And if you have comments or questions or how we can improve, we would love to hear that. So thank you. All right. Now your advertisement is over. We can actually get to the more exciting part of the afternoon. So it is my real pleasure to introduce this team, Dr. Eva Morava and Dr. Ethan Perlstein. Ethan is joining us remotely, but this is a wonderful team of project and science and really represents, I think, innovation in building out a new solution for patients with rare disease, but it also includes innovation in science as well as innovation on the business model. And I thought that would be a perfect opportunity to kick us off this afternoon to be thinking more comprehensively around innovations on that 3B space. Okay, so our first lead off is Dr. Eva Morava. She did her specialty trainings in Europe and also in the United States as a pediatrician, geneticist, and metabolic specialist. Her major clinical expertise is in inborn errors of metabolism. She has decades of experience in the diagnostics, follow-up, and treatment in IEM, especially in congenital disorders of glycosylation and mitochondrial disorders. She is actively involved in developing novel therapies in genetic disorders. Dr. Morava has a research laboratory here at the Mayo Clinic focusing on translational research in mitochondrial disorders and congenital disorders of glycosylation. She has more than 300 publications. She is passionate about education, especially patient education. So join me in welcoming Dr. Morava.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And then I should introduce my partner, Dr. Perlstein, and I will tell you how we met. So stay tuned. But first, we want to teach you a little bit about glycosylation. Probably you know that glycosylation is a biochemical process. And you see on this beautiful graph, all these colorful sugars. These are in the cell and they have to assemble to a sugar chain, get placed on a protein, and then that protein will be decorated with this glycan chain. And this is what we call the glycosylation process. If you have a defect in this process early on in activation or later placing the glycan chain to the protein or finalize the structure, you get a genetic disorder called congenital disorders of glycosylation, or CDG. There are more than 160 different genetic types of CDG. So what is CDG and what is the clinical phenotype? Glycosylation defects affect all the organs and organ systems in the body, mostly a liver disease because glycosylation happens in the liver, but it does affect muscle tone development and especially the coordination. Patients are generally not able to stand up and walk, and they are unable to color or write their names. Also, they have a delayed speech development. So hello, my partner, you're on.
I'm up. So thank you. Thank you, Ava. So I'm Ethan Perlstein, and I'm excited to sort of tell my part of this story. And it really kind of traces itself back to a fellow named Dr. Matthew Might, Dr. Matt Might, who had a son, Bertrand, who sadly passed from NGLY1 CDG, one of the many that Ava described. He actually connected me with Holly Carmichael, Maggie's mom. And that was way back in 2016 when Matt was, I think, still in the White House and working on all kinds of precision medicine initiatives there. And he's later gone on to run the UAB Precision Medicine Institute, and it's just a force of nature in this space. And so he plays a role as a connector often. And so really grateful he connected me to Holly. And early in 2017, my company Prolara, as the first biotech public benefit company, or PPC, started embarking on a journey with Holly's family. We call it a Pearl Quest. It's just kind of a fancy way of saying a research collaboration. And we developed new disease models for PMM2 that really hadn't been explored before. And we really focused on drug repurposing, because at the time, and still true today, there is no approved treatment. And so we wanted to be able to use models to have a sort of rational precision drug repurposing possibility. And so we developed what we kind of, I guess, call avatars. They're just sort of a more fancy way of saying disease model, maybe more relatable, hopefully. And with something with a disease like PMM2, where the gene PMM2, phosphoramidite mutase, is extremely evolutionarily conserved, you could actually use yeast and worms as a stand-in, and even use a skin fibroblast as sort of a stand-in for the complexity of a multi-system disease like a CDG. But we could take advantage of the fact that particular mutations could be traced back evolutionarily and even structurally on the protein to very conserved spots and functions. And so we were able to exploit this conservation and make disease models like yeast and worm, and do relatively straightforward drug repurposing screens. And so we could create sicken sort of slow growing yeast and worm models of PMM2 and then look for molecules that could reverse that. And then we could use the skin fibroblast as a way to more precisely interrogate the glycoproteome to see what was happening. And so here's an example with the worm model, a little bit easier to sort of see, but you're looking here on the left at sort of sickly PMM2 worms. We've actually had to make them a little bit sicker by giving them this sensitizer, bortezomib, which they're specifically sensitive to. And so they're kind of not really developing, and they're sort of not producing progeny. But on the right, you can see this wonderful garden of worms where the adults have given rise to progeny, which are now growing themselves. And this is an example of sort of a suppressor, a compound that would rescue this phenotype. And this process led us ultimately to this class of drugs called aldose reductase inhibitors, or ARIs. And we were really kind of struck by a chemical similarity in our yeast screens. We found a molecule that's the active ingredient in cinnamon, which is sort of the inspiration for the talk. And we realized that looking at the structure of this alpha cyano 4-hydroxycinnamic acid, we realized that, there were these features, this cinnamyl and this carboxylic acid group, that actually seemingly defined the pharmacophore and the activity of this as a aldose reductase inhibitor. And lo and behold, there was a commercially synthetic available, or I should say synthetic commercially available version of so-called Japanese cinnamon, apalostat, and referred to as Kinadact by its trade name. But apalostat was sort of the exemplar aldose reductase inhibitor that made it all the way through to clinical approval. And I think I'll let my partner take the reins again here.
So I just want to take a step back and say, I'm a clinical geneticist and I follow a lot of patients with CDG. And because this is a really rare disease, we established this consortium in the US. We call it the Frontiers of CDG Consortium. And you can see the different sites. And this consortium has an aim to improve quality of life and diagnostics and develop treatments in this disease where there is no cure yet. So we have natural history studies, we have a biobank, we have patient cell line. So we are a great group to get to collaborate with, right? So there is no cure in CDG. And as you see the long list, what we are doing, it's really supportive therapy. We treat the seizures, we do physical therapy, sometimes even a transplantation, but there's not much to offer. And there are only very early trials to try to do some dietary interventions in some of the CDGs. So then I met Ethan. So actually we met on a mitochondrial conference, which is funny because we are working now really on a different disease. And I learned that he's a Harvard PhD graduate, so I thought he's okay. He came up with this question like, Ava, I don't know you, but you're cool. Do you want to help me with my paper? I have a really cool paper. It's under review, but the reviewers are asking for more translational relevance. Can you help? So actually, we had several cell lines of patients we could use and test his drug. And what we saw, you see on the graph, that we tested 3 cell lines at the beginning, later many more. And then all the cell lines increased their enzyme activity on the drug, which is like mind-blowing. You have a genetic deficiency of an enzyme and you give a drug and you get like 50% increase in residual activity. So we got like crazy excited. So it seems like it's in worms and in patient cell lines. So what should be the next step? So this was our journey. We started with testing the cell lines and write a cool paper. And then Maggie's mother, who I knew from the patient association, reached out to me. Ava, I love you. You're the best person to do a single patient trial with this new drug on my child. And I thought, oh my God, like using a drug which never been used in children and only been used in Asia. I mean, I trust Japanese, but this was not, FDA approved in the US. So we went through a long process of asking the FDA to have, access to this drug and use it in Maggie. And actually, we started a single patient clinical trial within a year. So what do you do in a patient? Because Ethan showed all the worms, what they do, but in the patient, we wanted meaningful clinical improvement. So the most important for us was Maggie, who's unable to sit or talk or draw, whether we can measure improvement in her ataxia or coordination. She had severe failure to thrive. So we wanted to see whether she'd grow better. And we wanted to show whether the glycosylation labs, the biochemical labs, could improve. So this is Maggie. And so single patient IND went really well. You see how Maggie's body mass index went down before the trial, and you see where it started. It went up, like we could stop all supplements. She even got a little chubby. You see her drawing there. She could start to draw between the lines and really color and write her name. And then you see a complicated graph there, but it shows that her glycosylation improved as well. So now I scare you with this. I cannot help myself. I have to show you this. So this is actually the biochemistry behind it, because after we discovered this, we wanted to say, okay, but why is this happening? Why this drug is helping CDG? So complicated graph, but you see that red bulk, that's where the enzyme block is. So you see that normally you would go through to glycosylation. You see the colorful antenna at the end of the path. And you see that actually that purple X is really far away from the block. So our thinking was, if that is the step of all those reductase and we are blocking it, what will happen then? If you block that step, you will make less sorbitol, you have more glucose available, you have more glucose 1,6-biphosphate available, and that is a known activator of the PMM2 enzyme. So we did a lot of metabolomics and measurements. I won't bore you with that, but we actually could measure that enzyme blockage. You see the purple cross, that really increased this metabolite, which we know is increasing pre-MM2 activity, which increases substrate availability for glycosylation. And we did another cool experiment. And again, we don't have time to go into that, but it's just really something we are thankful for the Mayo Clinic glycoproteomics score, that they were able to see and show us that glycosylation as a massive, like all the proteins which were under glycosylated initially, you see that left shift on the volcano plot, they recovered like 60–70% of glycosylation recovered in our patient cells. So we are really excited. We found one more thing, and then I stopped my biochemistry lesson. When you think about this step, this is aldose reductase. This is a biochemical blockage. It's between sugar, table sugar, glucose, and sorbitol. So diabetic patients have too much glucose, and then that's why we use this drug to block the pathway to decrease sorbitol. So brilliant idea. If this works in this disease, maybe sorbitol was too high as well, like in diabetes. So we measured our patients' sorbitol level in the urine, and 80% of our patients had elevated sorbitol, which we never knew because sorbitol was never measured in our patients. So this is cool because we understand more about the pathomechanism, but even cooler because we have a new biomarker we know would be associated, and actually it's associated with disease severity. And you can see here also in the single patient IND, Maggie had elevated sorbitol and mannitol levels, which completely normalized on the treatment in a year. So here we go from single patient IND to clinical trials. We started with worms and eaten, and then we went to patient cell lines. We enrolled the patient in natural history studies. That was a really important step. We had our IND and we did our single patient trial. And then we requested a study IND for a double-blind study in 40 patients. This took a long time. There was a lot of negotiation with FDA. I think 1.5 years we about that we were in negotiations and now preparing for the clinical trial. So altogether from start to the end, it was 3 years still with the repurposed drug. But we are starting to recruit the first patient next week. It's actually next week. It's a celebratory day. So Ethan?
So I'd like to maybe just put it in kind of the just seeing is believing kind of terms here, which is kind of how I got to see this story unfold when I met Maggie around the time of the beginning of this walking compilation video. So bear with me here. It's a couple minutes long. I'm going to try to show you the highlights here. So there's basically this is Maggie's baseline. So she would go on to start taking a power stat in January of 2020. That was the picture there you saw where she was sitting in Ava's lap. And so this is sort of still another baseline video. So this would be a couple of months before starting a power stat. Maggie started taking another medication off label called acetazolamide around this time. So I think maybe this was sort of a baseline video there. I think this is the Grand Collar Hotel in Mayo, if I'm not mistaken, but
You're right.
I don't know what floor it is. I don't, but let's see if
But
I can.
maybe Ethan, just
Yeah,
if
there's a way for me to, oh yeah, sorry. I don't know if I can, if on your end, this video can be advanced. I'm not able to control the
just
timing.
play it,
But
Ethan, I think.
yeah, here we go. So I have the bar here. So basically we can go to, this is now the first measurement. Oops, maybe the first measurement here after a power set treatment. So there's 3 months on a power set. So hopefully people can see already sort of a more consistent gait here and able to keep a straight line, and then makes kind of a hard left into the elevator. I know it's an iPhone video. This is obviously not regulatory grade data, but this is sort of what was sort of being seen in real time. And now I think this is definitely Mayo. This is definitely that long corridor on the way to the
and
clinic.
look at how fast she goes. And then at the beginning, she could almost not start, and she couldn't correct her movements at all. So she's faster, stronger, and able to navigate.
So if
this
I can
was about 6 months, right?
Yep, this is about 6 months. So this is I think we were starting to realize that you needed to prepare for a study, a multi-patient IND, and then that was the beginning of that 1.5 year negotiation, basically. So if I can advance, oh, sorry, I lost my cursor there. If we can, sorry. Oh, here we go. So I'll get it right back, and let's just do one line, sort of to kind of the coup de grace here is that this is now even 1 year old, but here's sort of now Maggie kind of walking with assistance across her living room. And so I think by this point, we understood this was an N of 1, and this must be replicated, and this must be done under conditions where it's randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. And so that, as David said, that's hopefully beginning, next week after a long wait. We are finally here to start to expand beyond this single patient study. And I think at this point we can skip now to the fact that, yep, this is the latest update that had gone on to clinicaltrials.gov, but the trial is active and recruiting. So I think, do I pass it back here to you, Ava?
Oh, the collaboration we do together, right?
Together. So yeah, so I think ultimately we obviously want to be mindful of our friends in Europe, and I know Ava, you are a bridge to colleagues there in the CDG community. So I know we have plans to have a companion study there. There are obviously plans to survey other CDGs for sorbitol elevation and potential other biomarkers that might come along. But I think apelrostat clearly has a justification based on sort of elevated sorbitol, even if we don't know all the different connections and how this network, touching a spot here results in something else changing in the other part of the metabolism. We're still learning that. That's a frontier. But I think ultimately we're also doing other work with other CDGs and starting with different models and trying to repeat this whole sort of process from 0 to 1. So yeah, I think those are our future plans. And if you have any further comments on Europe side or expanding, please.
Yes, so you understand this is no cure, right? But I think it's a significant improvement in quality of life. You saw that Maggie still cannot walk. That's mostly because she has neuropathy as well. And it's very difficult because it's caused already weakness. Probably if we start the treatment earlier, we can avoid the neuropathy the same way as in diabetes. This drug is used to prevent neuropathy. But maybe we should also think about the goals for treatment. And I think that if you ask a parent, if my child is able to be at school and do the same activities, if my child is more stable or able to change places or sit without falling off the chair, and starting to make steps with some support, Holly is very happy with this little step towards, fighting against CDG. Thank you, Ethan, to be a wonderful partner for our research. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions. We do. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. So we have a question to lead us off. What made you decide to form your company? And do you have previous experience doing this? This is also a perfect opportunity to highlight Dr. Perlstein.
Sure. So yeah, Prolaro was I was the first time CEO, and just kind of went straight from my postdoc to just sort of doing it. And I didn't really have any real particular training in it, but I think that's maybe something a lot of entrepreneurs end up saying. My postdoc, I had an independent fellowship where I got to manage a lab and a small budget of over 5 years. So that I definitely had practice in hiring and operating a lab. So it didn't come out of nowhere, but definitely once I sort of got bitten by the bug of understanding that there was a big problem in rare diseases, a big unmet need, and that you could work with families that weren't even trained scientists, but they could kind of amazingly rise to the occasion and just become thought partners and business partners. It kind of just, that insight dawned on me at the beginning, and I thought I got to build a company around this. So that's no more sort of thought was put into it than that, and then it was just go.
So can I do a follow up? What was the role of the family? You always highlight, when I have a discussion with you, you always highlight the role of the family in your decision to build the company as well.
Yeah, so I think not everyone really actually wants to run a business, let alone a biotech business, especially if your kid might be, sort of in, that you're taking care of them as well. You're juggling a lot of balls. So I think we've kind of learned that at some point, if there's a sort of if the family realizes that there's an entrepreneur inside of them and there's a kind of awakening there, then we want to seize on that. And then, Maggie's Pearl is an example of how there's a way to make a joint venture with a family that wants to go in that direction. But we certainly don't want to force or expect that to be the outcome in every instance. But hopefully, those groups can have big impact and also set the stage for others to build on top of what they do.
Okay, I have two related questions, but one is, why was there a year-long delay? And
I'm sorry, why was
there a year-long delay?
a year-long delay? So we have a lot of difficulties with the FDA because rare disorders, they don't really have clinical trials. Only a few clinical trials are accepted in rare disorders and happening right now. We have an RDCRN, Rare Disorder Consortium, trying to help each other with the NIH support. Because if you imagine that I have patients who's having an incidence of their specific genetic disease, 1 in 2 million, it's really hard to collect like 20 patients, and even 20 patients are like, what is the power in that study? So first, we wanted to start with 16 patients, and we wanted to do an observational trial. We wanted to have more outcome measure observation to find the best outcome measures for a clinical trial. And FDA pushed us towards a double-blind phase 3 trial with, like extension, open label extension. So we had to rely on the outcome measures based on a single patient IND. That's still painful for us because, that could be a trap, and several rare disorder trials failed because of not using the right outcome measure, even though there was improvement, we just couldn't show it. So we had a long negotiation, and that took more than a year.
Great. What do you need next?
Oh, next. So we actually have new avatars, and Ethan has already good new candidates. We are just testing in our laboratory. That particular CDG is much more rare, and we needed time to find a reliable biomarker for the fibroblast studies. So we are doing it as we speak.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, let's thank our presenters one more time. Okay. So I get to hand off back to Dr. Raina Hale and for our panelists and stimulating discussions.
All right, if you are a panelist, can you come join me on stage over here? Oh, great, thanks. All right, there should be a mic. Oh, they put me in the middle. Okay. Wherever you would like, you can just pick up a mic. So one of the reasons we wanted to do a panel today was to get to know some of these Mayo Clinic teams or companies and hear a little bit about their stories. So my hope is that this is very casual on stage, as casual as it can be. But I really hope that the audience, I have the ability to read your questions off. And so please send questions to the panelists. So I'd like to start with Dr. Dean Friesen. He is going, well, I'll let everyone introduce themselves, but I at least want to welcome everyone. Ann Holter, Dick Eamon, and Steve Russell. Sorry, I knew on the spot is going to go bad, but I will let you introduce your teams, your company, a little about yourself. Like I said, the group is very diverse. So a little science for some people, but not too much science for other people. Dean, do you want to go first?
Yeah, great.
There we go. Yep. So I'm Dean Freestone. I'm the CEO and the co-founder at Seer Medical. My background is in research prior to starting Seer. So research across electronic engineering, neurology, and AI. I've been collaborating with the neurology practice here at Mayo for the past 10 years. So we've output a large number of research publications. Now, Seer is a tech-enabled home clinical monitoring services company. So we're fully vertically integrated. We manufacture our own devices. We also develop software and AI tools, and we deploy our technology through our own clinical services. So we are now active and the market leader for what we do in Australia. We also have a presence over in the UK, and now we're just rolling out our services here in the US. So it's really, we've been able to make tremendous amount of progress really, really quickly, innovating in the technology, but also innovating in the healthcare system itself through our home monitoring services, because we get to control workflows, we get to control data, and we really get to work on reinventing the healthcare system to make it more accessible and equitable for everybody.
Wonderful. Anne,
Hi, I'm on.
we'll see.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm Ann Holder. My background is very different. I actually started my career after a little bit of time in the military. I was in engineering and operations. And then I ended up in healthcare working in Medtronic for many years in a variety of roles in sales, business development, and actually finance as well. And where I found my passion was in chronic disease management. So really looking at using technology away from the clinical setting in the home to manage chronic disease, lower cost of care, improve outcomes. And I had a great opportunity to work with a company that we had acquired and integrated it into the company that did remote monitoring for chronic disease management. And through all this process, I was actually living in the Bay Area. Medtronic moved us back to Minnesota, and I adjusted. And then we actually, I spent a lot of time down here at Mayo and started talking to a lot of companies that were spun out of Mayo, and developed a really close relationship with Dr. Paul Friedman, who many of you probably know. And he came to me one day and basically said, we need to fix fetal monitoring. And I looked at him, I said, Paul, I know a lot about cardiology. I know a lot about chronic disease management. He's like, no, this is cardiology for. So I actually ended up leaving the position that I was in, and I joined Mayo as an entrepreneur in residence. And I have to tell you, it was amazing. It was just very fulfilling. I was working with a group of electrophysiologists, OBs, as well as engineers working in animal labs, doing clinical studies, trying to understand how do we capture a fetal ECG, maternal ECG, and contractions, and then utilize the technology developed here at Mayo to utilize machine learning and assess the signals for changes in the signals so that we truly understand when a fetus is in distress, or actually when a mother is experiencing cardiovascular issues such as peripartum cardiomyopathy. So we have developed a device. Initially, we were going into labor and delivery with our device to really help the patients or physicians understand if a fetus was in distress. And then we had COVID. So we very quickly pivoted because we had maternal fetal medicine physicians that were really asking us for this technology in the home. So we've developed a full platform now for prenatal and postpartum care in the home. And then once we have clearance on our device, it'll be integrated into the platform.
Awesome. And for Marani Health, correct?
Marani Health, yes.
Wonderful.
Good afternoon. Is this coming through at all? No.
Not yet.
Hold on. See, here we go. No. There we go. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Richard Eamon. I'm a physician, diagnostic radiologist at the Mayo Clinic. And aside from clinical duties and some leadership roles, I have a research program that's for many years been focused on developing advanced imaging technology.
Can you hear him? No.
No,
Okay.
we'll try over. Start over again. Richard Eamon.
We'll wait.
I'm a diagnostic radiologist at the Mayo Clinic, and For many years, I've had a research program focused on developing advanced imaging technology. The other activity I have is serving as CEO for a company called Resoundent Incorporated, which was founded by the Mayo Clinic to commercialize a technology developed in my research program. This technology is called magnetic resonance elastography, and it's a technique that uses vibrations or mechanical waves and MRI to image something that we can't see with conventional imaging modalities like CT, MRI, and ultrasound. It's got many applications. The main or one of the most important applications right now is diagnosing liver fibrosis, which is a common disease on a global scale. And it's now been established that this technology, magnetic resonance elastography, is the most accurate non-invasive technique for making this diagnosis, which otherwise previously required a biopsy. So Resounded was established by Mayo Clinic to kind of commercialize this, as I said, and has been successful in that, in working now with 5 MRI manufacturers to make this technology available to patients everywhere on their scanners. Through our work, we've also been able to work with the AMA, the American Medical Association, to create a Category 1 CPT code for to reimburse for MR elastography, and CMS has established coverage for that. And then finally, I think Resoundent is just investing heavily in the next generation of this technology, and we have a number of products in the pipeline. Some of them are already FDA cleared.
Dr. Russell.
So can I be? Yeah, okay. I'm Steve Russell. I started life in the UK. I moved to Mayo Clinic 24 years ago from Cambridge in the UK, and really have been pursuing a lifelong obsession to use viruses for the treatment of human disease, with special emphasis on cancer. And so I was recruited to Mayo in order to build a molecular medicine program that would be a fully translational virus engineering and therapy program. And it was as a consequence of that work that Viriad was formed. And Viriad's mission is to use viruses for the treatment of human disease, engineering them to fully retarget them. And there are really 2 major areas of application. One is the use of what we call oncolytic viruses, which kill cancer cells and bring the immune system in to further attack a cancer. And the other is for targeted in vivo gene therapy. A lot of gene therapy at the moment is done with cells being taken out of the body, genetically modified and put back. And we, through our virus targeting technology, can directly transduce cells in the body. So the company is doing pretty well. It's located over on the IBM campus, building 110. It was formed 2015 under the Mayo Employee Entrepreneurship Program, and which I think is a fantastic program. We'll hopefully get to talk about that. But we're over on the IBM campus. There are 75 employees there between Viriad and its sister company, Amanis. We have manufacturing, we have wet labs doing a lot of virus engineering, and we have a clinical trials network around the country. And yeah, so that's Viriad.
Thank you. So many things that I'm thinking, I want to go back to at some point discussing, you said we figured out CPD codes, which I think is payment. How does payment work? So remind me about payment in medicine and how that works, because I think many startups struggle with that space. But you were saying the EEP program, and I think it's valuable that, would you be willing to share how this technology, first off, how did you decide that it was time that this research got to a point where it needed to move to a business, and a little bit about what that looked like for Viriad?
Well, I think when the EEP program was started, it was already clear that what we were doing in this new molecular medicine program was developing drugs. We were engineering viruses and using them for therapy. And it was clear also that Mayo was never going to become a drug company, and that whatever technologies we would develop needed to transition into industry. So when the EEP program was announced, we were sort of racing to the front of the line to start a company. It wasn't really a decision made at that time.
It was we're going to head forward and make this happen.
Yeah, we
This is
need
what
to
we
do
need to
this.
happen.
Yeah.
To get to patients. Dean, what about for you? How did you get to that spot of it's not just research anymore, or maybe there's a bit of a mix. Research is still happening.
Yeah, great question. I think for me, it's probably like a combination of multiple things. Like one of the factors was that the scale of our ambition in terms of what we're doing in the research lab outgrew what was possible from funding and traditional funding grants, even from foundations. And so we were starting to think about, to be able to translate some of our ideas, we needed to think much, much bigger. And the only way of funding that was actually through large investors. I think the other thing as well was that there was convergence of technologies at the time to make this possible. So when we started SEER, it was around sort of 2016, 2017. And at that point, there was an explosion in the ability, what we can do with AI, what we could do with mobile networks and cloud computing. And when we pull that together, we can do something really impactful. And there was a huge patient need as well. I think that's really critically important. So we were tackling a huge problem in epilepsy where there's like a 30% misdiagnosis rate, and about a third of people with epilepsy actually don't get control of their seizures ever. So we wanted to make sure that we could tackle that grand challenge. And I think the third thing is, the final thing was probably around, we thought that we could actually make a positive change in a relatively short period of time because clinical norms were changing. So we do home healthcare, and there was a great emphasis on being able to manage patients where they live in their homes. And so we felt like we had some tailwinds in terms of those clinical norms. And also there was, existing reimbursement structures for what we do as well. So that was fantastic.
Awesome. Anne?
Yeah, my situation is a little different. I didn't have any experience in actually being in this early of a stage company. I had been in large companies. I had done business development, started new businesses, but I wasn't quite sure when to take that step. And so I just really utilized the mentors that I had around me and the folks that I was working with. Mayo Ventures was extremely helpful. Andy Danielson was actually one of the folks that brought me into this project along with Dr. Friedman. And for me, it was all about making sure that I got to the point where there was, making sure that we had a need for the technology in the market. And then also prototyping. We did a lot of work in the animal labs. We did a feasibility study at Mayo. And at that point, I just really went back to the mentors that I had, and they're like, oh my gosh, you're ready to go. So for me, it was utilizing the resources around me to understand at what point do you go out and start raising funding and spin the company out.
So we have a need. It needed to get out. We had funding opportunity and a little bit mixed, it seems like, with that. What about for Resound It?
So it was an interesting situation. We once we solved the technical problem of getting vibrations into the liver, which was the thing we had to do in order to make this application for detecting liver fibrosis possible, we of course rolled that out in the Mayo Clinic for testing under the IRB course. And this turned out to be very successful. And we reached a point, and we were doing patients who were offered this test, this non-invasive test, who were going to have a biopsy. And our clinicians came to us and they said, you know what, we don't want to do those biopsies anymore. We just want to do MRE. We realized we were probably into something that we needed to share with the world. Mayo Clinic started getting letters from patients all over the country wanting to come to the Mayo Clinic so they could avoid a biopsy and have this test. So we realized we had to get it out. Now, I've been involved in developing other technologies in MRI that and fortunately, Mayo Clinic Ventures was very successful in licensing those technologies to the imaging companies. When we took this technology to one of the big MRI OEMs, they looked at it. They said, we like the technology, but it requires specialized devices, and we're not prepared to make the investment that it would take to produce those, manufacture those. So we realized that if we formed a company to do that, that would be possible. And within a few months of forming the company and making and manufacturing these devices, it became, they went on board. And since then we have 5 manufacturers on board, and there's now 2,000 sites around the world that have this technology.
So I like that there's really unique differences, but I want to pivot a little bit and ask a question more personal about what was your experience? You said, this was my first technology. What was your first technology, and how old were you in your career? What did that look like?
Well, I was really lucky. Timing is everything. So I was really lucky as a young radiologist to be involved in the rollout of this new technology that we called MRI. And in those days, we understood so little about it that almost anything you could develop was really good new knowledge. And so I was involved in developing, and my focus was on solving the problems that I faced in everyday practice as a radiologist. So there were, for instance, flow artifacts, we called them in MRI. When blood was flowing through the plane of section in an image, it created all kinds of flow artifacts. And working with a colleague of mine, we developed a solution for that. So that just led to a whole series of little developments that helped the medical practice of MRI. That we were fortunate to have this organization that was then called Mayo Medical Ventures, which was one of the first really tech transfer organizations after the Bayh-Dole Act. That was really a place that you could take these ideas and then they could figure out how to get them out to the world.
So did you feel like that first invention nervous, or this is totally going to work, everything's gonna be fine? What was that like?
Well, that's a great question. And it comes back to, we have, if you are in, many people here don't have access to an academic medical center, aren't working within an academic medical center, but some do. And the great advantage of working within a clinical practice is that we can take an idea, think we've solved it, and then we can deploy it and test it in our own environment under certain circumstances, of course. And so really, by the time we had this solution to this flow artifact problem, we knew it was going to work. And we could and Mayo Clinic Ventures could take it to the companies and have it commercialized.
So de-risking at that point was very, very important. The ability that you could de-risk that. Dr. Russell, what about you? What was your first technology?
So, my first big technology was when I was in Cambridge. I started very early on in my career trying to target viruses by displaying antibodies, single chain antibodies on their surface to get them to attach to a new receptor on a target cell. And I was in the Center for Protein Engineering in Cambridge, and I succeeded in displaying antibody on retrovirus. And it was the first time it had been done. It was filed, a patent was filed by the MRC, and then they called me and said, Dr. Russell, we want to commercialize this technology and we need your help. And I said, well, actually, I don't believe in all this commercialization stuff, so I'd rather not help. And they said, well, you don't seem to understand. We pay your salary and we want to start a new company. So they then started introducing sort of recycled entrepreneurs to me. We'd go out for dinner, and eventually I teamed up with somebody and we went out, we raised money, and we did form a new company called Cambridge Genetics that used this display technology as a drug discovery tool. Cambridge Genetics eventually did quite well. It was acquired by other companies and sort of moved up through the system. So I had that experience behind me when I came to Mayo, and it was, I learned so much with a great deal of nurturing from the Medical Research Council in the UK. So
it also sounds like partnerships were essential for you. No thanks. I don't really know that I want to do this. I think probably many scientists, clinicians alike think, what is this really what I want? But it sounds like you had a team that kind of came around you to pick up some of the pieces. How important has the team been for you for Vyriad to be so successful?
Oh, the team is everything. I think in order to start a new company, you've got to believe in yourself and believe in the technology. You've got to be resilient. You've got to have good luck. But, above all else, I think it's about the people. And I've been very fortunate to, gather people around me who can do all those things that I can't do. There's so much more to a company than just kind of knowing how to engineer a virus to retarget it. There's just a mass of things that you have to kind of grapple with in order to turn it into a successful business venture. And it's teamwork all the way.
And you spoke that you were brought in with a team here kind of at Mayo already. Was this your first technology that you were deploying into a startup, or what would your first one look like?
No, prior to doing this, I worked for a company that had technology that was bioimpedance spectroscopy that was used for early detection of lymphedema, mostly for women with breast cancer, so that you could catch the progression of it much earlier and reverse the issues that you get with lymphedema. And so what I started working on at that company was actually utilizing the same technology for chronic heart failure, and utilizing the technology to start understanding when fluid would actually start building in the lungs due to chronic heart failure. So for me, that was really, really game changing, because I really got to see the whole process of developing a medical device and bringing a medical device to market, from the quality systems, regulatory, again, going back to reimbursement and understanding all of that. So it was really, for me, it was game changing. And it also gave me the confidence, when I had this opportunity to really start working on fetal monitoring, it gave me the opportunity to really jump in.
Wonderful. Dr. Feenson, what about you? Is this your first technology, or do you have some experience beforehand?
It's definitely my first startup, but like when I was doing my PhD, I was a little bit strategic in trying to work out how to get technologies out of the lab into the real world by partnering with other companies. And so I remember I was at a conference in Boston, and one of the leaders at Medtronic was talking about the first deep brain stimulation system that could do recording from the human brain. And I was doing research on trying to predict seizures from similar signals. And so I chased him down and said, hey, I've got the best idea you've ever heard. We should do a pilot together, and explained my research. And then he actually got interested, and he called me back into Minneapolis, and I pitched to the leadership there, and they decided that it's probably got some legs. And then they sent me down here to Mayo because there was a similar trial happening in the neurology practice. And that was fantastic. And so we're actually able to get this trial off the ground. We took it through some preclinical work into humans. And through that, I started a collaboration here with Mayo, which was wonderful. And also got to really understand what it was like at the top end without having to take all the big risks of starting a company. And I think that's a really interesting way of partnering as a researcher with other companies to really start to understand the cogs in the bigger machines. And by the way, like the environment here in Mayo for starting businesses is probably one of the best in the world. I was part of the cohort, the first cohort for the Mayo Clinic Platform Accelerate program. And it was just such a wonderful opportunity to be plugged in to the broader ecosystem here. So that's including Mayo Clinic Labs, working with the DMC guys, which has been a wonderful assistance, and also the Medical Alley team that can plug you into the broader ecosystem. And there's just so much available here to help people get out of the research world or the scientific world into the startup community. And I think that's probably the first step. I would recommend anyone in this area to sort of touch base with those people within those networks. And I think that would be my recommendation of the first steps for anybody here.
So I come from the Office of Entrepreneurship Lens, which we're teaching entrepreneurship here at Mayo to all Mayo Clinic staff. And we see two different things. This fear of, this is going to fail. I'm not willing to do this. I don't want to look crazy. I don't want my whole career to end. And then the fear of, whoa, what if this works? What if a company can actually be created? What if I actually can change? Was that my intent originally? Has anyone experienced, or can you share a little about what those experiences have looked like for you? Whether it's that, yes, totally, this is going to work, or, whoa, this might not go so hot.
For me, it changes every 5 minutes.
Fair enough.
You have these incredible challenges that you need to face at the same time, these incredible wins. And so it's a bumpy journey. And so especially in the world that we're in, right? So we're in this clinical world where there is a high degree of scrutiny with regulatory and the InfoSec side of things, particularly for AI. And the challenges come at you so fast, but at the same time, healthcare has the biggest challenges that society faces today. And as Chad, our VP here in the US, sort of says, anything in healthcare is enormous. So we're all tackling enormous problems. Which is absolutely wonderful, and that keeps us going every single day.
Yeah, I think for me with the technology that I have, it's going to work. Never had any doubt whatsoever. But the issue is when. You know, because that's the whole risk that you take when you launch a new company. You know, you've got to keep it moving and you've got to be on a certain tempo of progress in order to keep the funds coming in. You know, you grow your staff, and the bigger your staff gets, the higher your burn rate, the more dollars you actually need coming in. And so the timing has to be right in relation to the technology. I think, you know, one of the advantages of the EEP program is that you can start a company without personal risk. I mean, it's huge at Mayo. So I kept my Mayo position, full-time Mayo employee, and the company buys my time from Mayo Clinic. So no risk to me, company goes belly up and I'm still there. The investors hate that. The investors come in and say, what? There's something wrong with this picture. And, you know, so my last day at Mayo Clinic was yesterday. So I now am the full-time CEO of their.
Congratulations.
So, well, you should
For
not.
a
You
wonderful
should not
Mayo
applaud
Clinic
me
time.
because actually it's what I'm confessing to is that, you know, I didn't take the risk when I probably should have. I waited until it wasn't a huge risk. And so, you know, that I really do admire people who just take the plunge and, you know, without any certainty about the future.
Please.
In hindsight, would you have left earlier?
No.
So I will counter that. My experience was very different. Can you guys hear me? There we go. I didn't have a position. And from a financial perspective, you know, I was like, what am I doing? You know, I was very nervous. It was a huge risk for myself and my family. But quite honestly, and we talked about it a little bit earlier this morning when Delphina was doing their presentation, you know, the technology is so needed for maternal care. It is just really, really sad. And I just felt so passionate about it that I felt like, you know, this is a risk that we just needed to take. And I had full support from my husband. And, you know, I kind of knew that if it didn't work out, I would be okay. You know, we would be okay. But I did feel very comfortable because of the team that was assembled at Mayo, the physicians and engineers that I was working with. And we did a really good job of, you know, prototyping and understanding what we were building before I went out and started raising money. But it was, you know, I look back at it and scratched my head. I was like, it was kind of crazy, you know, and here I was at this, you know, later part of my career with 4 kids, you know, and thinking about putting them all through college. And I was walking away from my career to do this, but I have to say, I'm just incredibly passionate about trying to make a change and actually bring the technology into this century.
Very cool. But you, fears or totally this is going to work?
Well, it's interesting. These are all different stories and they're all different variations of the same kind of story. But in the case of Resoundant, I never had the idea that I would be leaving Mayo because, of course, it was a company established by Mayo in this particular case. But it was a new type of venture because the idea was that this company was designed from the beginning to support research. So really the R&D operation for Resoundant is actually the laboratory at Mayo. And so I really had no thoughts at all about leaving Mayo because this was really the engine that generated the ability to push this technology forward. And we have a lot more to do in that area.
Changing a little bit, one of the fears that typically comes up and knowing the Walleye teams that are going to come up is funding. How do I fund this entity? Can you share some of your experiences with funding, some of the ways that your companies have been funded? And I know there's a plethora of different ways.
For us, when we started, we self-funded it. So George, my co-founder over there, and we I sold my house. We put in our own money. And like we took the plunge in a really big way. So I'm incredibly envious. Yeah, and our families put in money as well. And so that was a big deal. And I think that you know, that adds an additional element of pressure because we absolutely felt like we could not fail. And then unfortunately, we're in a business that grew really quickly. And our first challenge was how do we keep up with the growth? And that's when we needed to go out and look for external funding. And because we were growing so quickly, we were able to attract investment, but we weren't really plugged into the big network. So we raised money from family and friends and high net worth individuals that we're able to get to through our networks. But that is something that if I could play again, I would probably look to institutional money earlier because building the systems that we need to build, like we're talking about global technology platforms, need a lot of funding. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between the research world and the entrepreneurial world. Someone asked me about that the other day and I said, what's the difference? Well, about $100 million. That's the difference between like a research grant and something you need to bring to life here. And so a recommendation from anybody, for anybody that's thinking about starting a company is make sure that you're well capitalized, particularly in the environment that we're in right now. And I would look to enter into programs like the Accelerate program to get connected to those networks.
And my story is very similar. It was friends and family in the beginning. We did a simple bridge in the beginning, and then we did our first price round. And actually, a fund located here in Rochester, Southeast Minnesota Fund, was one of our first investors that we had. We raised about 1.5 million in that round, and it took us quite a ways. And then, I mean, it's just now we're kind of in this cycle of, you know, seed rounds and getting ready for an A round. Cool.
Well, the stories are all different. In my case, because I've been involved in these previous developments for MRI, which had generated revenue for Mayo from licensing, Mayo has a policy, as most institutions do, of sharing those royalties with the research program that originated them. That allowed me to do the research that was necessary, that would never have been funded by an NIH grant because it was just too crazy an idea that that was behind this technology. And so it allowed my team, which was, we had a wonderful team, to basically do this research, develop these technologies, develop this algorithm that processes the data that makes this possible. And so by the time we had this thing ready and had proven it in the practice, it was able to transition to a company with actually very little initial investment required. So it's just another variation on these kinds of stories.
So I've probably spent more of other people's money than anyone else on the panel here by the sounds of it. So we've raised, I think, well over $100 million to date for the company. But it, you know, when it started out, it was, you know, people call it friends and family. It really is like, who do you know who's got some money, who believes, who will listen to you long enough to, you know, reach a decision about whether they believe in you and whether they want to take a risk in what you're doing. I was fortunate. I'm on the board of trustees of a liberal arts college in Iowa, and a lot of the other people on that board said, oh, well, you know, we know you, we've known you for a few years, you know, if you want to do this, we'll chip in. And so friends and family was really important early on, but then I realized you can't, if you're trying to build a drug from scratch, you know, you've got a lot, you need a lot of money, you know, in the end, before you get an approved product, it's hundreds of millions of dollars and a lot of clinical trial activity and so on. And these early friends and family investors cannot put more money in. And so, you know, at some point you've got to find investors of a different capacity. And that's quite a hard transition. You know, I did find the venture capital groups, I got a lot of introductions from Mayo Treasury who, you know, do invest in venture capital firms. And so they could make the introduction. And it was always a little bit of a cold shower. And they would say, well, you know, great technology, but really the ecosystem in Rochester looks a bit early stage. There aren't examples of other successful biotech companies growing up in Rochester. And, you know, I think if they don't tick all the boxes on their evaluation, then they don't put the money in. So that was hard. And we realized that probably our best bet was going to be to go after a pharmaceutical partner, because that would then depend on the quality of the science we were doing, and not so much on other company parameters. And we were fortunate to secure a very major deep collaboration with Regeneron Pharmaceuticals end of 2019. And they put about, I don't know, it's $45 million or so into the company, in addition to paying for all of the work that's being done in collaboration with them. So they really took away that need that we had for external funding. Although obviously, you know, we've been spending that money, and then we needed more money last year, and we went out again, and we were successful raising an additional $30 million earlier this year. But, you know, that cycle is going to continue for quite some time to come, that we're going to need to go out and find more money. And anyone who puts money in wants to know, well, you know, when am I going to get payback? And so this idea of a liquidation event, whether the company's acquired or whether it goes public, I think is very important. And we'd like to become a publicly traded company probably in a couple of years' time, but we have to make sure everything, you know, is moving well. Most importantly, the clinical trials and the technology pipeline that we're developing. And at the moment, the clinical trials are going well. And we have a lot of patients responding to intravenous administration of virus.
I feel like there are a lot of people in this room that would like you to make introductions for them based on funding. But I think also what you said was really important. One of the questions has been, you know, what's different about a life science startup? What makes it so unique? And part of that is what you said was time, and that you aren't having a product within a year or 2 years of an investor investing. How long are each of you kind of assuming, maybe at this point, till a company is publicly traded or acquired or revenue generating? What's the timeline really look like for a life science company?
For us, like we've been operating now for about 6 years, and just earlier this year, we got our FDA clearance. And we've also got the CE clearance and in the UK as well. So, and we did that quick, I think, because we not only had to design and build a product, we also had to sort of go through V1 of a manufacturing facility as well. But that gives everybody an idea of like the timelines. You know, the product development life cycle is sort of that 5 or 6 years before you can actually get your approvals to be in market. And then after that, you've got to think about timing from there. So you really want to be on that sort of upward slope towards when you can actually have that liquidity event and to be able to go public or something like that. So, gosh, it's a long time. It really is.
I will share this story. I have been asked a couple times to go to Kellogg and work with a class that's really focused on bringing medical technology to the market. And Pete McNerney and some of you in the room on the VC side probably recognize the name, but Pete teaches the class. And the first thing he says to everyone, you know, because these are all people that want to be in healthcare and bringing medical devices to the market. And he basically lectures them on how difficult it is, how much money it's going to take, and, you know, and the time to do it. And so he kind of goes through, you know, what that means. And everyone's sitting there thinking, well, geez, do I really want to be in this industry? But then he says to everyone, it eliminates the competition, because there's not a lot of people out there that actually have the stomach to do this. So it really does kind of take that marketplace and make it a little bit different. But it just takes time. It takes time. For me, almost exact same timeline. We're looking at FDA clearance in 5 years. We are commercializing part of our platform now, but it takes time.
So again, I think that one of the things that I would remark about is that there's a spectrum here. So, Dr. Russell here is at one end of the spectrum, which of difficulty. And we all know that it takes, a decade or two to get a drug from the laboratory to the medicine cabinet, right? But that's not true of all medical technology, life science. You go to devices, you go to diagnostics, you go to analytics. As you go down that spectrum, it can become faster. And so we shouldn't make everybody depressed here about how long it takes because it can move quickly. And in fact, much of the what we heard this morning, for instance, many of those enterprises could move faster. In the case of Resoundant, the time from after we figured out how to get these waves into the liver and started the testing at Mayo Clinic to the time the company was created and there was an FDA cleared product on the market was 3.5 years. So it can move very quickly. Now, I'll tell you though, that even though that's happened, the medical system moves very slowly and medical practice evolves very slowly. So you may have a company that has a product that's even FDA cleared and maybe even has a CPT code, but the time it takes for the medical community to adopt something and for it to become common practice, even if the literature is completely clear that this is a superior way to treat patients, takes a very long time. And I'll just stop there.
I want to echo that as well. Like clinical norms is such an important thing in terms of the time to get something into market. And unless it saves doctors time and makes life easier, and it can also address I guess the commercial aspects of healthcare as a business, then it doesn't matter how great the science is. Like you gotta make sure it fits within the clinical norms.
So I'm going to answer, or we have a couple of minutes to do some of these questions. So feel free, if you haven't asked one yet, to submit a question on VVAX. One of these questions is, we're obviously in the Midwest at an ice fishing walleye tank competition in the winter. How has being in the Midwest affected your startup?
Well, I think it's difficult. It sort of implies you might have been somewhere else. I mean, we span out at Mayo Clinic and, we did have some wrestling going on with potential investors saying move somewhere else. So we did vaguely consider it, but how it impacts things is that living in Rochester, Minnesota, it's a small town, there isn't a big biotech community. And so people look at you and think you won't be able to recruit good people, but you really can. It's just the pool of people that you're recruiting are those scientists who happen to have their first baby just arrived, or they got a couple of young kids and they're looking for a place they'd really like to live and settle down and stay long term. And, for some of those people, we've been the only biotech option that they could find in Rochester. There's a lot of people come into town because their spouse decides to work at Mayo Clinic, and they come in thinking, what am I going to do? And there aren't that many options for those people in town, but, they're happy to turn their hand to things in the company. So I really do think you can find good people. I think if you try and go and recruit your conventional sort of chief operating officer or chief business officer or chief medical officer or whatever from the Bay Area or from Boston, it's probably not going to work out because they're on a piece of elastic that will pull them back there. So I think it's really important to stick with people who are just happy being in the Midwest and who can do the job you want them to do.
Well, it's interesting that it's about 10 years since Mayo Clinic changed its policy and instituted the EEP program. And prior to this program, and this was a change that was put in place by the Board of Governors, at Mayo Clinic, being an entrepreneur was actually prohibited by policy in the medical system. It was not within policy to establish a medically related company on your spare time. And that policy changed all that and made possible the EEP program. So at the time, those people who were involved in developing that new policy, and Steve will remember this, were concerned that that the local ecosystem did not exist to start companies. So it is so much better now, locally, unbelievably better from that standpoint. So I'm going to shift from establishing the company to, on the other hand, developing the IP or what it is that you could establish a company about. And there's no place I know of better in the world to develop a new medical technology than the Mayo Clinic, because people talk to each other. We all identify problems together. It's a wonderful place for someone who wants to solve problems. So when you ask that question, I think we have to at least mention that that's really a remarkable advantage for those people who work at the Mayo Clinic.
And I echo that. I've just had an amazing experience working with Mayo Clinic on this, but I also will say that the engineering expertise that we have for medical technology here in Minnesota is huge. It really is. And a lot of people, I mean, even from both coasts, rely on a lot of resources that we have here in Minnesota, from regulatory attorneys and regulatory consultants, quality engineers, and for me, everything is, ISO 13485. Just those resources that we have here, you don't need to go anywhere else. Now, I will say that, but if there was a point over the past 12 months, it's getting a little better now, where I did have to go outside of Minnesota to find some software resources. But other than that, I've been very, very happy with the talent that we're finding here.
You moved to Rochester. So
Look, I think the biggest thing I could say is that the Mayo brand is extremely strong. So it helps when you're doing things in other areas as well. So we're headquartered in Melbourne, Australia. We have a decent sized office in London and a small office in Munich in Germany. And just working so closely and being embedded within Mayo is extremely powerful, not only locally, I guess, in the US, but also in these other areas. So that is a great strength and a massive lever to be able to grow companies from.
wonderful. Well, last question is, what is your advice? What is your advice to the young entrepreneur who maybe hasn't done their first technology, maybe is getting ready to leave their normal and make some really big leaps? What's your advice for them?
Well, I think like anyone coming from the science and research community is obviously going to be very passionate and sort of mission orientated. So that's great. Also going to be very smart. So they're absolutely essentials, and especially the mission orientated part. The piece that you need on top of that is a high level of resilience, at least for most companies, because with startups, especially if you're taking money from friends and family, once you start, you can't stop because there's a lot on the line. So you need that high level of resilience. You need to be highly competitive, and you need to be able to really just execute on that. Another thing as well is to keep focused. If you get $100 million check, maybe you can spread out a bit, but no, keeping really focused on your customers and what's really required to be successful in the commercial sense, because a lot of scientists get anchored to the particular technology or the particular science, and that's what's important to them. But once you transition to a commercial world, it's really, you need to be a little bit more flexible with those core ideas and just try and work out how to meet the market with where it's at. And so I think that's probably the strongest bit of advice I could have.
So for someone who is early in their career and they think it's something that they want to do, I would say get as much experience as you can. And look into different areas so that if you want to do this, you can understand how to run a business. And medical technology business is a lot more complex because of what you need to do. So I would say just really get that experience. And while you're doing that, build your network, because you're never going to know everything. And you need to really have those mentors that you can go to, that you can rely on in specific areas, and pull them in so that you've got the help and the team that you need in the future.
Well, I'm going to focus my comments for people who are in academic medical centers that want to be entrepreneurs. So, I would say, number one, pick a problem that's important. Get inspired by by the problems that you encounter or your colleagues encounter. Number two, if you solve a problem, why not deploy it if you can in the practice and show the world that it works? I have encountered so many people that have this great idea and this great solution to something, and you ask, is it in use anywhere? And they say no. Share it with colleagues or other places. So there's nothing. Nothing proves the technology better than having it being used at other places, and you can do that as a researcher as you're moving into commercializing something. Another one. Take advantage of the expertise in technology transfer that every academic institution has. Since the Bayh-Dole Act, we have these organizations like Mayo Clinic Ventures that have tremendous expertise in this area, and so many people, don't take advantage of it. Another one, proactively manage conflict of interest, because if you are an investigator and you end up being an entrepreneur, where you are entrepreneuring your technology, you could end up ending your research career if you're not careful. So work with your conflict of interest review board, if you have one or whatever else, to make sure you have in place a conflict of interest management plan that really makes sure that you can safely continue your work and you're doing the right things to do that. And then finally, just have fun and keep things in perspective.
Well, it's difficult to add anything to that. That's a very comprehensive view of it, and I totally agree with you, Dick. I think you've got to be, if you're going to be the lead entrepreneur in any new entity, you've got to believe in it. People have said to me in the past, somebody in the company has to believe in the technology. And, you really have to do that. So it's not just, it looks like I could make a company out of that. It's got to be this, I really, really want to do this because I believe that this is going to be good hopefully for reasons other than financial. But somebody's got to have passion. And I think, you can be either the type of entrepreneur who used to go to the Medical Research Council in the UK and say, what have you got? And look at the portfolio and find something that they could really see was, connecting with them. Or you can have developed the technology yourself. But I think whatever it is, you've got to believe in it. And don't try and do it alone. I mean, you're absolutely not alone. I think that was a really important question you asked me about, other people. It's so critically important. I mean, you just can't do everything. And there are so many potential friends and allies out there, especially if you're good at articulating why you're passionate about what it is that you're going to develop and how it's going to change things. And there are many different types of, money out there and individuals out there. And, if you have that persistence, you will find the right people to work with you, and it will happen. And third, and I'm sorry to keep harping on about this, but you do have to be lucky. So if you have habitual bad luck, do not try and start a company.
I told you it was worth staying for the afternoon because this panel has a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. They are here for a little while longer to come and talk to you, get to know them. Like he said, you need a team, and there are people that have done this before. So thank you for having gone before and do this stuff and give an encouragement to all of us who are looking at doing it forward. So let's thank the panel. All right, you can set your mics down. All right, our next person up on stage, I would like to welcome Dr. Martin Rotman, who comes from the Office of Entrepreneurship, Florida, and he is going to be sharing our community connector spotlights, some of which are also coming from Mayo Clinic, Florida. Martin?
Thank you very much. I think the panel very clearly established the need for this community, a group of people who can help you move these ideas forward, because you're not going to be doing this all by yourself. And I think in this section of the event, the Community Connector Spotlight, the first one of two of those spotlights that we're going to have this afternoon, we're going to showcase three very important connectors, institutions within Mayo Clinic, within the ecosystem around the Mayo Clinic, as well as in our community at large here in Minnesota, that can help you move that idea forward. And I am happy to bring onto the stage and invite onto the stage Dr. Gloria Olivier from Mayo Clinic Ventures, who will Dr. Olivier is a biochemist with a PhD in molecular biology, and she did her postdoctoral work at Mayo Clinic, after which she became a patent agent, who then joined Mayo Clinic Ventures, our technology transfer office, as a patent liaison, and then transitioned to technology development and her as a current role as the director of biopharma. She is originally herself from Chile, and she has so it's written here, a wonderful husband, 2 boys in college, and a fun dog. Dr. Olivier, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro. The last part was just for you. I didn't know that you were going to mention it anyway. Many thanks for the invitation. And it's an honor for me to represent Mayo Clinic Ventures. This is the intellectual property office of Mayo Clinic. In every aspect of what we do, our primary value of the needs of the patient come first is represented, and particularly in the innovation of patient care. The Mayo Clinic innovation ecosystem is large, and is represented here only as a small fraction of that big picture. At the core of it, we have Mayo Clinic 3 Shields of practice, research, and education that bleeds to the rest of the institution in all the departments and specialty areas that foster innovation and entrepreneurship. Beyond the walls of Mayo Clinic, we have our external stakeholders that span local, regional, national, and international sectors, from venture capitalists, economic development support, and private equity firms. This is a wonderful array of partners and collaborators that are key to the work that we do. We recognize that alone we don't get anywhere. So joining forces is what accelerates innovation and medical discoveries. The Department of Business Development is the front door to business at Mayo Clinic. We have 2 very dynamic teams, Mayo Clinic Ventures and Corporate Development. Mayo Clinic Ventures is the technology commercialization arm. Corporate Development are our colleagues that work on these large strategic partnerships and mergers and acquisitions. These 2 teams work together for one mission: to support. We support the Mayo Clinic 3 Shields of research, practice, and education. We support the 2030 strategy for Mayo Clinic to cure more patients, to connect our physicians with patients around the world, and to transform healthcare. We support innovation. So with Mayo Clinic Ventures, which was mentioned by the panel many times, is a group that has expertise in licensing, in patenting, in technology development, and in the commercialization of the Mayo Clinic innovation. So if I had to ask you, where do you think the Mayo Clinic Ventures rank among all the technology transfer offices within the US? Well, proud to say that just as Mayo Clinic is the #1 hospital in the nation, Mayo Clinic Ventures is the #1 technology transfer office within all the research organizations in the US. Very proud that we are #1 on bringing innovation to the market. We have the largest number of invention disclosures that come to our office yearly. We have the largest number of startups. We have the largest number of technologies that have licenses that generate revenue. So when we excel the way that we do at Mayo Clinic, it's because we have that capacity of translating idealism into action. And that is represented by the fact that 10% of Mayo Clinic employees are inventors. They are innovators. They create, and they create for us a very diversified portfolio in all the specialty areas among the Mayo Clinic enterprise. So with that, we have filed about 9,000 patents. A third of those have been issued. We have more than 270 companies that have Mayo Clinic intellectual property, and about 4,000 technologies have been licensed. We now bring about 100 million back to Mayo Clinic every year. And this year, guess what? We are celebrating again, not only for being the #1 tech transfer office, but for bringing back to Mayo Clinic $1 billion. That is a great celebration for us. But what we celebrate the most is these millions of lives that have been touched by the Mayo Clinic license innovation. This is just a small representation of all the Minnesota-based companies with Mayo Clinic intellectual property. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you the Mayo Clinic Ventures team. This is the team that has the expertise in licensing, patenting, technology development to transform the Mayo Clinic innovation from the benchside all the way to the bedside. So I'm very proud to present this team. Come and work with us. Please contact us. You feel free to send me directly an email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olivier. I was just whispered into my ear that this used to be 5 people. So Mayo Clinic Ventures has significantly, in business development, has significantly grown over the last couple of years. And that's good because, as you know, innovation has been expanding rapidly across the entire enterprise. And one of the institutions that can help connect all of these things together is our Mayo Clinic Innovation Exchange. And I'm happy to bring onto the stage our next short speaker. This is Amrika Ramajan, a principal business strategist within the Mayo Clinic Innovation Exchange, and then instructor of healthcare systems engineering within the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and Science. She leads the development and execution of the exchange's strategic technology platforms and connects healthcare entrepreneurs with resources to transform ideas, to develop products and scale faster. And Amrika herself has an extensive background in digital transformation and innovation within over 10 years of experience in technology management, processes, and systems engineering. And golden masters from masters in science from analytics from the University of Manchester in the UK, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from the University of the West Indies. I invite you to the stage and invite you to welcome her, Amrika Ramajan.
Thank you, Martin. All right, so the Innovation Exchange is a platform, a membership-based platform that was launched in the summer of 2020, and we provide concierge support, so really a really high degree of touch support to innovators at every stage of the commercialization process by connecting them to key resources and innovation enablers across the Mayo Clinic innovation ecosystem. Our members include pre-seed to growth stage healthcare startup companies, as well as Mayo Clinic staff who have opted in to participate in our ecosystem. And in terms of our companies, we have onboarded over 60 of them since our program launched in 2020 from various countries with headquarters all over the globe. Internally, we've also had over 1,300 of our Mayo Clinic staff participate in our ecosystem across all of our Mayo Clinic locations in the US and internationally. Members of our platform have access to our growing premium resource network, which includes several top-tier professional services firms such as Accenture, and we're also rapidly expanding to include additional firms in the legal, marketing, regulatory, and commercial strategy space. For Mayo Clinic staff on our Florida campus, partners like Georgia Tech's Biomedical Engineering Department and Florida State University allow us to create and deliver really unique programs to support early stage innovation through what we call our Convergent Science program, where engineering students and faculty at these academic institutions partner with our staff to develop prototype solutions to problems faced in the clinical practice. And actually just last year, we had one of these student teams pitch at the Walleye Tank, and they won their category in the junior angler division. So we're really proud of that team to come here to Minnesota and share what they've worked on. We also strive to provide relevant and impactful educational programming across the innovation continuums that is accessible to all of our Innovation Exchange member companies, as well as innovators across the Mayo Clinic enterprise. Examples of this content include looking at emerging trends in healthcare in partnership with some of our premier partners, as well as looking at helping our companies and our innovators learn more about how they can access resources to support their ventures, looking at financing, raising capital, accessing non-dilutive funding, and a lot more. We also support education through technical and product development. So looking at educational sessions that really teach how do you go about doing these things, looking at regulatory process, looking at quality management systems, and looking at the process of developing products and technologies in the life science industry. So I'll wrap it up there and we can take any questions, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrika. Actually, there is a question, but we'll get to that later on. You can also ask questions later on after the event at the social event afterwards. So with Mayo Clinic Ventures is a great place to get started with your innovation and to get the protection up on place for your intellectual property, and go with the innovation exchange to get to the point where you know with whom to connect and move forward. But then you actually need to go and bring that innovation somewhere. And so one of the places where you can go and bring that is the Destination Medical Center here in Rochester itself. I'd like to invite Patrick Sieb to the stage, who's the Executive Director of the Destination Medical Center Economics Development Agency. And the DMC is the state's largest public-private economic development initiative. And it's turned into a global destination for healthcare and wellness here in Rochester. Sieb's team is responsible for attracting private development, deploying innovative public investments, and basically applying the 21st century city design practices to achieve DMC's vision for creating Rochester into that international hub. Prior to the DMC, Sieb was the Executive Director of St. Paul's Riverfront Corporation, so basically means he knows exactly how to take a city and turn it into the next level. So if you have difficulty parking, this is the individual you want to have a conversation with. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the introduction and kind words. And it's really been a pleasure being amongst all of you over the last evening and over the day today. Destination Medical Center was born of the idea that Rochester, home to Mayo Clinic, the #1 healthcare provider in the world, is a state asset, is a state resource. And the state of Minnesota in 2015 committed $585 million, along with the city and the county of Olmsted, to enable Rochester to achieve its role as being the America's city for health. And our work is really to demystify it, is to figure out how to spend $585 million. I get to wake up every morning and think about how do we spend $585 million to grow our city, for public infrastructure to grow our city. And then alongside of that, as we are growing the city, how do we attract businesses to grow the economy of the city? And so when the state of Minnesota conceived of this idea, they had a very broad definition of what public infrastructure is. Certainly it's streets and sewers. And, you know, you think about the kind of foundation you have to have as you're building your companies. A city needs the same kind of foundation, the infrastructure that allows it to grow. Streets and sewers and sidewalks, the things commonly understood about public infrastructure. But so too does it need cultural institutions, educational institutions, the resources that are necessary to attract people, to attract talent, to attract patients, to get people to move here and to stay here. And that's the work that we do. Alongside that, as I said, we attract businesses here to grow the economy. And that is really led by Chris Shad, who many of you have met, and what's known as our Discovery Square Innovation District. This idea that the low-hanging fruit of Rochester to grow and diversify its economy is in the life science industry. It's in the industry that connects to Mayo, that relates to Mayo, that really becomes the concentric circles around which we can imagine the growth to occur. Chris's role in leading the Discovery Square Innovation District is to both identify and support the build out of infrastructure. And in the case in that case, it involves things like the 1 and 2 Discovery Square physical buildings that become home to existing companies and new companies, but curating that in a way that really maximizes the relationship between companies that are establishing a footprint there. In addition, looking at infrastructure like what we're calling discovery labs. Discovery labs being shared wet lab environment, maker space, the idea of a simulation lab, a lab that can help build out the workforce, but also becomes a place that you can test new technology. So we are 7 years in to this 20-year initiative. And in that 7 years, we've invested about nearly $200 million in, again, public infrastructure. But you see it in the new housing that's been developed as we are growing the downtown and the vibrancy of the downtown. You see it in the cultural institutions, the events and activities that makes Rochester a vibrant place, a place that people want to live and call their home. And you're seeing it now in the life science industry as we are building the physical plant necessary to be home to companies from locally and from around the world. And you heard from Dean from Sear from Australia, many examples of companies who are connecting to Mayo that can see value in being physically proximal to Mayo. And I'll just end by saying, those of you who are unfamiliar with Rochester or first-time visitors, Rochester's the kind of city where the density of people who have, I mean, on a per capita basis, I am quite certain we have more PhDs and MDs than any place else in the country. And what that means is, and what that translates into, is when you go out for a happy hour, or you go to the coffee shop, or you're walking home, you're likely to bump into somebody who is the smartest, brightest, most advanced in their field. And you saw a couple of them on stage earlier today. So all of that to say, I'm so pleased to be here, so pleased to meet many of you, and I'm excited to hear the pitches yet this afternoon. Thank you.
I would like to welcome up Neela Moligard from Launch Minnesota. She's the executive director of Launch Minnesota. She is working to create an environment to support entrepreneurs and nurture tech startups with a goal of fostering an innovation ecosystem across the state that draws global attention, talent, and capital. Prior, she was the founder of the non-for-profit Red Wing Ignite, which supports entrepreneurs, businesses, and students to succeed in the 21st century economy. She has created a model that has received national attention, developing an innovative ecosystem by forging partnerships with government, academic, corporate, and community partners. Welcome, Neela Moligard.
Hello, and thank you. It's always so inspiring to be at Walleye Tank events. So it's great to join you here today. As Rena shared, I'm here representing the state. I'm from the Agency of Economic Development and Workforce. And our mission with Launch Minnesota is the effort that I lead, is really to empower and elevate our state's vibrant innovation ecosystem. We all know that Minnesota has a long history of being a place where great ideas begin and grow. And when businesses start here, they stay here. And these stats prove it. And those of you today that are growing and launching your business here, you are in the right place. Minnesota is known as Medical Alley, right? The #1 health tech cluster in the world. We rank first in medical device patents. Mayo Clinic's ranked first among research institutions in the US for bringing innovation to market, and the #1 #1 hospital in the US. We have the University of Minnesota leader in the nation with research and tech commercialization. But none of this happened, these stats, by luck, right? It was done very purposefully by the leaders in this room, by organizations, by the innovators that wake up every day and try to solve big problems. So how does government play a role in this? I believe strongly that we need to have a seat at the table. And our focus areas are threefold. We are trying to drive economic growth and opportunity while reducing disparities. We create greater access to capital. We create statewide connectivity and increase entrepreneurial talent and expertise. We are really proud that we've been able to put capital in the hands of startups through undiluted grants, tax credits, loans, and building relationships with our investment community. We are building a connected and collaborative culture across the state. We have a hub and spoke model representing every corner of Minnesota, because we know a connected and coordinated ecosystem increases the rate and the success of new business formation. And then we're also working with our partners like the University of Minnesota and others in this room to provide that expertise and talent and the know-how for entrepreneurs to be successful. Now, a key thing that we just launched that hopefully all of you have heard about is an opportunity to increase that access to capital. Minnesota, like other states, have received money from the US Treasury. Over the handful of years, we'll be receiving $97 million in 3 various tranches. There's 3 of those funding vehicles today that I'd like to just briefly touch on that I think are most relevant for this audience. So hopefully you've heard about these. The first one I want to just touch on is the Growth Loan Fund. We have $12.5 million. If you are raising at least $500,000, you can have a loan for $100,000. So the loans are from $100,000 to $400,000, 20% of your raise, with very favorable terms, with a 7-year term. That is being led with Indeed, the state agency, and happy to tell more information about that program. The other 2 really exciting programs that I can discuss today is the multi-fund VC and the direct investment VC. And we have partnered with the University of Minnesota, the Office of Investment and Banking, to manage these programs. They are our state-sponsored entity, and they are managing all aspects of these programs. So let's break this down a little bit further. So the multi-fund VC investment will be about $22 million, obviously in those 3 different tranches. We hope, they hope, I've talked to their managers, so this is from them. Just the messenger on this is about a $1 million into about 6 different VCs in this first tranche. And the direct investment would be a total of about $12 million, looking at an initial investment of $200,000 with possibly another $100,000 follow on to about 12 companies in the first tranche. So a brief overview, I can provide more details about that and websites and contact information, but a very exciting time in Minnesota to really better leverage funding vehicles from all stages of that startup journey. So entrepreneurs in the room, you are surrounded by people and organizations that are here to support you and want to see you be successful. I am very grateful for our partnership with Launch Minnesota, with Mayo, with Rena, with Mary, Rick, with the Tech Commercialization Office and the University of Minnesota. And I am confident that working together, we will make and keep Minnesota a great place to start and scale new ventures. Thank you so much.
First of all, thanks to all the people that have been pitching. It was an amazing feat to be able to get all that information down in 120 seconds. And so a round of applause to all the pitchers, as well as to our judges who now have the task of, in a very short period of time, select the top winners for each of those divisions. So thank you, judges, for that. And while they are deliberating on who they want to highlight as winners for the Walleye tank, we are going to take a step back and take another look at the connecting entities within our community, because we have the community connector spotlight number 2. As I promised, we will have it bookended with all the community that surrounds this event, the Walleye tank. So I would like to invite to the stage Philip Kostel, who is the startup principal at the Medical Alley Association, which is an organization of more than 750 members across the whole healthcare continuum. Medical Alley Association vision is to elevate the medical alley as the global epicenter of health innovation and care. Philip over there is responsible for the Medical Alley Starts, which is a venture platform to lower the cost of starting and scaling and pivoting these new ventures. And Philip helps startups across the healthcare sectors by connecting them with investors and corporate development partners and other resources in Medical Alley and elsewhere. And his own background is in venture capital and finance and merger and acquisitions. And for 3 years, he was in charge of the deal assessments and negotiations at an angel network, and spent another 3 years negotiating M&As and merger and acquisitions and finance deals. So that's a lot about money. I'd like to invite you up to the stage.
Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Philip Kostel. I'm the startup principal at the Medical Alley Association, but mostly today I'm going to be talking about Medical Alley Starts. Very briefly about Medical Alley Association, which was founded in 1984 by Earl Bakken, the co-founder of Medtronic, with really one simple idea: to bring companies from different healthcare sectors together under one roof, and to make Medical Alley, the corridor stretching between Rochester and Duluth, really the global epicenter of health innovation and care. Today, we have over 780 member companies, and half of those are startup companies. Most of them are actually pre-revenue startup companies, which, as we've heard today a number of times, is not uncommon in healthcare. We can do the work we do with startups because of our foundational and sustaining members, including Mayo Clinic. These are the companies that have really bought into the mission and vision and that help support our activities in the startup business. So why Medical Alley Starts? We realize that startups are hard. It's a really treacherous journey to take an idea and turn it into a solution that's hopefully going to help patients down the road. There's a ton of obstacles, market risk, regulatory risk, financial risk. And on the flip side, it's difficult for large companies and VCs to partner with startups as well. They have their own constraints, obviously. So that's why we came up with an easy button, Medical Alley Starts, which is a venture platform to lower the cost of starting, scaling, and pivoting new ventures. And you can find out more information about Medical Alley Starts on medicalallystarts.com. We have not done this alone. We have been fortunate enough to be supported by a number of entrepreneurs and advisors. This is actually the composition of our Medical Alley Starts advisory board. And we've been very intentional about getting together people from the corporations, from the VC space, but also from the medical device, biopharma, and digital health space, because as we all know, and as we've heard today, Medical Alley is no longer just about medical devices, but also about digital health and biopharma companies. We're also fortunate enough to be supported by our sponsors, JP Morgan, Clifton Larson Allen, a couple of gurus, and Diversified Plastics, which are companies that contribute to fulfilling the mission and vision to lower the cost of start, scale, and pivot. Excuse me. Now on to the individual services that we can help startups with. I should mention that for early stage startups, which are kind of pre-Series A companies, membership is free of charge because we don't want to be another bill that companies have to pay. And we can help them with fundraising. We've spent quite a bit of time building out our investor network, having conversations with VCs, finding out what their investment interests are. We've spent an equal amount of time, I would say, talking to large corporations, finding out if they're interested in acquiring new technologies, in establishing partnerships with startups so that we can make relevant connections between our startup members and our large corporate members, but even large companies that are outside of our membership. If I learned one thing in my short time of living in Minnesota, it's that people are actually really willing to pay it forward and help out other people. I think it's doubly true in healthcare, and we've been really blessed to have entrepreneurs that have been successful, that have built and sold businesses that are willing to help entrepreneurs that are just getting started. Now, this might be another thing that I learned in my short time here in Minnesota, and that's that it's not the flashiest state. And we're, I think, not great at talking about our successes. And that's why we're trying to promote the local success stories, promote the local exits, promote the local large fundraisers, promote the local mergers and acquisitions. So whenever you or your company have a success, please feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to share it with our network and outside of it. Because we've been really active when it comes to establishing partnerships globally. When the local or regional market gets too small for a company, we're more than happy to help make connections in your desired destination as well. So how to get involved? We're not just working with startups because that's only a part of the startup ecosystem. So if you're an investor and you're looking for quality deal flow, we're more than happy to send that over to you. If you're a corporation looking for new technologies, also willing to help with that. Service providers, we're more than happy to refer companies over to you. If you're experienced entrepreneurs, we would love to hear from you because there's never enough people that are willing to help other entrepreneurs. And if you're a global accelerator, you can partner with us. This is all with a single goal to make or keep Medical Alley the global epicenter of health innovation and care. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out because we're running out of time, but more than happy to have you on board if you're interested.
And Philip, I presume that people can also find more information additionally on the Medical Alley website. And that probably just follows medicalalley.com. Up next, I would like to invite Anne Schulte to the stage. Anne Schulte has over 20 years experience as an investor and a strategist, and Anne is currently the lead executive in residence with the University of Minnesota's Discovery Launchpad mechanism. In recent years, she has also been the commercial strategy consultant and independently and with boutique consultancy companies. And her work has included the development of commercial strategy supported by qualitative market research and fundamental market remodeling. And has interviewed physicians, administrators, nursing staff, and other end users for feedback on new products and the impact of product adoption upon medical practitioners, hospitals, payers, and patients. And this often resulted in the definition of value propositions based upon work with the hospital value analysis committees. Anne earned an MBA at the University of Minnesota, a baccalaureate in accounting from the University of Buffalo in New York, and also a chartered financial analyst, a CFA, designation, so now you know what CFA stands for, and has successfully completed CPA examination. And thank you. This certified public accountant certification. And please, the stage is all yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce Discovery Launchpad. We are a no cost, no equity, no strings attached coaching program out of the University of Minnesota, working with the Technology Commercialization Office. We have a team of 12 expert, experienced advisors who meet our startups where they are in terms of the coaching and the support that they need. That may mean defining what is the target market, helping you determine who you need to talk to get your voice of customer, who your competitors are or may be, and of what interest you could be to strategic investors in the space. We have a broad network of resources behind our advisors. We have over 400 members of a business advisory group that Mary McCarthy referenced earlier. And we are also connected to Medical Alley and Launch Minnesota. Our executives in residence each bring over 20 years experience in everything from finance to strategy to marketing to building a pitch deck, listening to the pitch deck, pitching the business, but also building commercial organizations and also defining regulatory strategies for both pharma and medical devices. And so this is the team that I work with most closely to support startups out of the University of Minnesota. And functionally, what we do is assign a team usually of 3 experts, depending on what your startup needs. There's generally a CFO included in that. We may tap one of our regulatory people depending upon where you are in your development process. If you're closer to commercialization, we'll bring in people who have that expertise. And we work with startups for a period of 3 to 6 months, meeting in alternate weeks to give you some time to cogitate upon what we've said, maybe do some legwork, or for us to do some legwork, we access some interns out of the Carlson School at the University of Minnesota to help us do market research and market sizing and figure out just how many people are going to buy this widget because there's this many surgeries, but how many of them are going to use this? Are they going to put it in an autoclave to use it again? Or is there a way that we could really make this disposable? And so we will ask all of the questions that our judges asked today before you go in to make that pitch. And you're saying, well, and this sounds great for people who are with the University of Minnesota. I'm not with the University of Minnesota. So how the heck does this help me? Well, as Neela Malgard mentioned, the State Department of Economic Development has a Launch Minnesota program where those with innovative businesses and products can apply to receive funding through the state. We also applied to receive funding to the state to provide coaching to participants in Launch Minnesota. We are opening applications later this month for our January cohort. If you have a Launch Minnesota grant, you are eligible. And this is the application. It shouldn't take you any longer to complete than it took me to create the form. We would then invite you, if you're chosen for the cohort, and insider tip, last semester, we brought in 100% of the applicants. You would be matched with a coach who will provide an assessment of where you are and what you most need. And if we can support you, which we probably can, we will invite you into the full Launchpad program for about 4 months of 3-on-1 support every other week to help you reach your goals in developing your organization. I've had the privilege of working with Discovery Launchpad for about 5 years. I've been executive in residence for 1.5 years, and I will say this is one of the most impressive groups of people I have ever met in terms of their ability to communicate and to understand the concepts that you are bringing as entrepreneurs. We work with you to support your success, and our goal is to create sustainable investable businesses that you can either continue to run or license to an appropriate strategic who will make sure that technology comes to market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Schulte, that sounds like a great opportunity for the companies that are here, especially the insider tip on the success rate of applications. So a strong advice for everybody to apply. One of the companies that might be able to apply is Dr. Wes Weerson, founder of and CEO of Leah Labs. Dr. Weerson himself is a passionate scientist, a dog lover and entrepreneur, interested in applying his expertise in gene editing technology to solve consumer level problems in society. He studied microbiology as an undergraduate, where he was first exposed to gene editing technology through undergraduate research. And as a PhD student, he developed gene editing technology that then permits the integration of exogenous genes into the genome with a base pair precision, thus giving cells new functions. This technology allows scientists to study biology and genetics and to engineer living products. He is experienced in the early stage startup fundraising, licensing, and commercializing academic technologies. A small business grant funding that he received as well. He would love to talk to you about all things startup, and I personally know as well that he himself, as well as his company Leah Labs, are current residents of the hatchery wet lab space here in the BioBusiness building. I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Dr. Weerson, and the founder of CEO of Leah Labs. Thanks.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction, Martin. So as Martin said, I'm Wes Weerson. I'm founder and CEO of Leah Labs. This mutt right here is my chief inspiration officer, Layla. And at Leah Labs, we are building living therapies for dogs and their humans. So I'm here to talk about the hatchery lab, but first I want to tell you about Leah Labs. So we're building this company at the crux of 3 booming markets. Pets, raise your hand if you have a dog. There's over 100 million dogs in the US right now. 66% of households have them. And we've never spent more money on our dogs, and we've never expected better care from the money that we spend on our dogs. Gene editing. So I myself am a gene editor by training. The costs to do gene editing are falling, the efficiencies are rising, and gene editing really allows you to do things that have never before been possible in the world, like engineering living cells to use them as therapies. So this is what we call cell therapy, and that's what we're focused on at Leah Labs. We use living immune cells to fight cancer. This is called CAR T cell therapy, and here's how it works. We extract T immune cells that are found in all of us and use gene editing that I developed as a graduate student to reprogram these cells into CAR T cells. So CAR stands for chimeric antigen receptor. There's a fusion between an antibody region that binds to specific antigens that are found on cancer and the T cell receptor, which activates an endogenous T cell killing response. So in this way, you engineer T cells, put them into the body, they seek out cancer, recognize it like a lock and key, and then destroy it. There are 6 FDA-approved CAR T products for numerous blood cancers in humans, and there are hundreds of FDA clinical trials ongoing for CAR T cell therapies. There's additionally thousands of CAR T cell therapies in academic and corporate pipelines that will soon be applied. And these are really remarkable breakthrough therapies. They bring about 80% response rates as last line therapies in patients, human patients who are quite literally on their deathbeds. They will die, but CAR T cells are able to give them another shot. So at our company, we really see this opportunity to expand and disrupt the current cancer treatment paradigm in pets first, but also dogs and humans share all of these organ systems, obviously, like the brain, the liver, the nervous system, bones, lungs, and all of these organ systems get cancers in humans, and they get analogous cancers in dogs that are driven by the same mutations that have the exact same clinical targets for cell therapies. And all of these organ systems have current CAR T-cell therapy trials ongoing. And this slide was prepared by us for a preprint we put out about 1.5 years ago. So this is certainly could use an update. There's definitely more in the pipeline right now. But the way that we view this is that Leah Labs can first target B-cell lymphoma in dogs as an unmet need, but also then be able to use dogs as a model to iterate and innovate in a spontaneous disease model to actually help humans as well down the line. So my journey to the hatchery and what is the hatchery? Let's talk about that. So I did my PhD at Iowa State University. However, the grant that paid me to do my gene editing research was also shared with some talented scientists at the Mayo Clinic. So we were collaborators on this project. And what this project really led to, as my friends and parents say, is me making fish glow during my PhD. But really what this is here is you're looking at me integrating the fluorescent protein, red fluorescent protein, into genes in zebrafish at base pair resolution so that you can tag genes, see where they're expressed, and then down the line be able to do really cool functional genomic studies on that. So this was a great technology. We filed a patent for that. Mayo Clinic has been prosecuting that. And really what that led to then, almost 5 years ago, was me pitching Fluffy Pharmaceuticals at the Walleye tank up in Minnesota. So that was a really great experience, thinking back to that and seeing the walleyes here today. So during that time, we were also going through the NSF iCorps program, thinking about how to commercialize the technology and interviewing customers. And then this culminated really in us getting accepted into the accelerator program out in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator. So we got into YC, and then we needed a space to actually do work. And because we were commercializing technology that was patented by Mayo Clinic, we got access to the Mayo Clinic Office of Entrepreneurship and the Hatchery Lab. So here's a photo of the door of the Hatchery Lab. Because of our access to the Hatchery Lab, critically, we have been able to obtain NSF SBIR funding. So we have a phase 1, a phase 2 pending. I have to shout out Pat Dillon and MNSBIR for her help on that. We've had 3 Launch Minnesota grants, again, because we have access to the hatchery. We have $200,000 Regenerative Medicine Minnesota grants because we're able to do our science in the hatchery as a young startup. We've been really successful in raising equity crowdfunding, so about $870,000 using regulation crowdfunding. We'd love to talk about that. I think it's a really cool way to raise money. We also have an NIH phase 1 SBIR. We've been invested by Groove Capital, the new fund up in the Twin Cities. So shout out to Reed and Kayla up there. And then more recently, Southeast Minnesota Capital Fund invested in us. So shout out to David and Harry there. So what is the Hatchery Lab? This is a fully functional lab and office space. So there's a cell culture suite with everything that we need to do or everything that we need to build cell therapies. We, in this lab right there, and that hood right there, and these incubators, we have engineered CAR T cells that we have put into dog patients, actually, someone's pet. So there's also a fully functional molecular biology suite. This is where I live and where I make all the tools that we actually transfect and put into T cells to generate therapies and ask experimental questions. And then there's, of course, a fully functional office space, co-working space. That's really great. Co-working cubicles, office, whiteboard, TV, all those things. And I make the joke when I'm on investor calls that I have, 12-foot windows, and this is the nicest office I'm going to be in until we're a $100 million company. So it's a really amazing place for us to be as an early stage startup. And we only pay $660 a month. Pretty incredible. So, there's many other intangible benefits of being in the Hatchery Lab. So, first and foremost, I think is full ownership of company IP. So we are entirely independent from Mayo Clinic. If we use the wrong pipette, or if you, rented 3 feet of lab bench from your academic lab at Mayo Clinic and you use the wrong pipette, perhaps Mayo Clinic would say, oh, we helped you invent that. No, we don't have any of that. Everything we build is ours. You also get access to Mayo Clinic core facilities and equipment. So we used a flow cytometer there until we bought our own, and different PI equipment if we want to test different things before we buy it. And of course, clout for grant submissions. So, in NIH, the environment is one of the huge things that you're scored upon. You have to show that you actually have the ability to do what you need to do. And using, being able to use Mayo Clinic and the Mayo Clinic facilities access is huge. And of course, another, interesting thing is lab safety training and modules for employees, making sure that everyone is safe. I think that's a really important thing that we get access to through being at the hatchery. So, we wouldn't be alive today without the Hatchery Lab, full stop. We've raised almost $900,000 in grant funding. Again, thanks to being able to say that we have facilities access here. We pay $8K in rent, which is like 2 or 3 months anywhere else. We have access to a fully functional lab space and core facilities as an angel or seed stage company. And we've, now treated our first patient with CAR T cells, dog patient. Just 4 weeks ago, we're treating another patient starting on Monday. And, we're working to hatch out with our a Series A next year into our own space. So if any of this was interesting, I'll be hanging around. I'd love to talk to you about any of it. Thank you a lot.